The night of the charity ball at the Whitmore mansion was bright and loud. Music played through the large hall, and every corner sparkled with golden light. People in fine clothes smiled, laughed, and raised their glasses high. The air smelled of perfume and expensive food. It was the kind of evening that looked perfect from the outside. Yet near the edge of the crowd, a young woman tried to hide her shaking hands as she carried a tray of glasses. Her name was Lila Carter. She was not one of the guests. She was there to work. Lila had borrowed a plain black dress from a friend. It was a little too loose for her slim frame, but it was the best she had. Her shoes were worn at the edges, and her hair, though carefully combed, refused to stay neat. Still, she tried to look calm and proud. Every few moments, she reached up to touch the small pendant around her neck. It was silver in color, with a bit of blue glass in the center. It was old and not fancy, but it meant more to her than anything she owned. Her mother had given it to her when she was a little girl, saying it was lucky, and that it carried a promise of better days. As Lila walked among the guests, carrying her tray carefully, she felt eyes on her. People whispered and smirked as she passed. Some thought she was a stranger who had sneaked into the mansion. Others simply looked down on her simple dress. It stung, but she kept her head high. She needed this job. The pay for one night could help her buy groceries for the rest of the week. Near the staircase, a group of young women in shining gowns stood together. One of them, Clara Bennett, was the loudest of all. Her father owned part of the Whitmore estate, and she was known for her sharp tongue. When Lila passed by, Clara glanced at her, then whispered to her friends. They began to laugh. Lila pretended not to hear, but her face turned pink. As she moved away, she heard Clara say, in a voice that carried across the room, "Look at that girl. That necklace of hers looks like something from a thrift shop." The laughter grew louder. Lila kept walking, her heart heavy. She went toward the corner of the hall to set down her tray. The sound of music faded for her. Only the laughter remained in her ears like a dull bruise. She touched her pendant again and whispered quietly, "It's not worthless. It's all I have left of her." In that moment, she wished she were anywhere else. Outside under the open sky, at her small apartment where no one judged her, even in the kitchen where her friends from the catering company worked, anywhere but here. She thought about leaving, but the manager had warned her that leaving early meant losing her pay. So she stood still for a moment, took a deep breath, and turned back toward the crowd. A few kind people smiled kindly at her, but most did not notice her at all. She worked quietly, trying to blend into the background. She helped refill glasses, handed out plates, and watched the clock slowly tick toward midnight. Each minute felt longer than the one before. Every time she passed Clara's group, she felt the heat of embarrassment return to her cheeks. It was like being the invisible person in a world of shining lights. But there was something else that no one saw. Beneath her quiet face, Lila carried a strong heart. Life had never been easy for her. Mother had passed away when she was just 16. Since then, she had worked hard at small jobs, never giving up, no matter how tired she felt. That pendant was her link to the past, and she wore it every day as a sign of hope. As she stood near the grand piano, the chandelier above her caught the light just right, sending a soft shimmer across the room. The pendant around her neck reflected a small flash of blue across the floor. She did not notice it, but that small flicker of light caught someone's eyes from across the hall. Near the entrance, a man stood watching. He was tall, with calm eyes and quiet strength in his posture. He had arrived late, and people whispered his name as he walked in, but Lila did not know who he was. His gaze lingered on her, not because of the mockery happening around her, but because of the pendant she wore. His expression changed slightly, curious and thoughtful, as if he had seen that pendant before in another time. Lila bent down to steady her tray again, unaware that this stranger was watching her. She could not know that the very thing people had laughed at tonight would soon draw the attention of someone whose name carried power and respect. The mansion was full of gold and noise, but in that moment, something quiet and invisible began to form a line between two hearts that neither yet understood. It started with a small flash of blue and a pendant that held a secret. Ethan Monroe walked into the hall with the calmness of someone who had seen many crowds but trusted few. The grand Whitmore mansion looked the same as every wealthy gathering he had ever attended, filled with people eager to impress and be seen. The shining gowns, loud laughter, and hollow compliments were part of the dance he knew too well. Yet tonight felt strangely different. His eyes searched the room, not for another business partner or investor, but for the tremor of truth that sometimes hides beneath all the show. That was when he noticed her. The young woman near the piano was not dressed like the others. Her black dress was plain and her shoes worn. Her face carried both shyness and quiet strength. People whispered about her, but what caught Ethan's attention was not her awkward position among the rich. It was the soft blue glow of the pendant she wore. It was small, simple, yet made him stop walking. His mind went back to his late father's small jewelry shop. Long before Ethan became a billionaire, before the Monroe name meant wealth, his father had spent long nights shaping gems, one of which looked exactly like that pendant. It had disappeared in a fire that destroyed the workshop years ago, taking most of his father's early work with it. He had believed that pendant gone forever, but now, standing under the golden lights, he saw it again on the neck of a girl who did not belong. Ethan's assistant spoke quietly beside him, reminding him of donors waiting for a word. He nodded absent-mindedly, but his thoughts stayed with that pendant. She tried to remember every detail, every curve of the design, every color of the glass. It was too identical to be coincidence. He watched as the girl, whom he would soon learn was named Leela, carried a tray with steady hands. Some laughed as she passed, and Ethan saw the flicker of pain in her eyes when a woman in a red gown said something cruel. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, though he said nothing. He moved toward the far side of the room where he could watch quietly. Leela tried to stay invisible. She told herself to finish the shift, to ignore the whispers. The light music and the smell of roses made her dizzy. But each time she reached for her pendant, she felt stronger. It reminded her of her mother's gentle voice telling her that every person's value comes from inside, not from what others see. She held on to that thought like a small candle in a storm. Ethan's gaze stayed with her as he greeted a few guests politely. His words came automatically, but his mind was elsewhere. He remembered his father's hands polishing gemstones, and the way he used to tell him that true. Beauty never comes from wealth, but from connection and meaning. His father had loved creating something from nothing, and this pendant, the one on Lila's neck, had been his first design full of hope. When Ethan's company grew richer, he had promised himself that he would one day find that lost piece. Now fate had placed it in front of him, worn by a stranger with eyes that looked too honest for this glittering crowd. As the evening went on, Ethan noticed how others treated her. The laughter around Leela grew louder. Clara Bennett waved a hand toward her and laughed again, showing no kindness. Ethan felt a small flash of anger. The cruelty of the privileged was something he had learned to tolerate, but tonight it felt personal. He could see the girl's hands tremble as she tried to pretend she did not hear. The pendant shone faintly again when the chandelier's light touched it, almost as if it were alive, as if it carried the same quiet dignity as its owner. When the music changed to a slower rhythm and couples moved to dance, Ethan took a step closer. Lila turned to move away from the crowd, searching for a moment's peace. She found herself near the wide window that opened out toward the garden. The night air came through in soft waves, cooling her flushed face. For a second, away from the stares of others, she breathed normally again. Ethan stopped a few steps behind her. He did not approach immediately. He looked at the pendant again and felt both confusion and curiosity. He wondered how the daughter of a worker came to own something that had once belonged to his father. The thought struck him deeply, not as a mystery of money, but as a thread of fate quietly spun across years. Lila sensed someone near her and turned slightly. Their eyes met for the first time. Her heart jumped. She recognized him instantly. Everyone knew his name. Ethan Monroe, the man from the magazines, the youngest billionaire whose company shaped cities and fortunes. He was supposed to be somewhere far above her world, yet he looked at her not with pride or coldness, but with something else, something questioning and gentle. Ethan spoke politely, his voice calm but firm. He asked if she was all right. Lila nodded, though her voice caught in her throat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The music continued behind them, faint and distant. Then, Ethan asked about the pendant. His tone carried genuine interest, not the empty curiosity of the rich. Lila's fingers touched the small blue crystal as she said softly that it once belonged to her mother. Ethan's expression changed just slightly, a mix of surprise and recognition that he could not hide. The noise of the hall returned around them, but something unseen had shifted. A quiet link had formed, born from sorrow, memory, and light. Neither of them knew yet how much this small meeting would change their lives, but the air carried a sense of beginning. Lila felt her heart beat fast as Ethan stood beside her near the window. The music behind them faded in her mind. She could hardly believe that someone like him was speaking to her. His voice was calm and patient, not proud like the others in the hall. He looked at her not as a servant or stranger, but as someone who mattered. Yet, before she could say more, Clara Bennett and her group walked toward them. Clara's eyes widened when she saw Ethan Monroe standing beside the quiet server. Clara smiled in a way that looked kind but was sharp at the edges. She spoke loudly enough for several guests to hear. She asked Ethan if this girl had been bothering him. Her friends laughed softly behind her. Lila's face turned red. She tried to step away, but Ethan raised his hand slightly, asking her to stay, told Clara calmly that they were just talking. Clara blinked, surprised that he would defend someone like Lila. Clara turned her sharp gaze toward Lila again. She said that not everyone belonged at a place like this, that some people should remember their place. The words felt like little stones thrown into Lila's chest. The whispering started again around them. People were curious. Who was this girl who had caught the billionaire's attention? Lila wanted to run, but Ethan looked at Clara with a steady expression that made the hall fall silent for a moment. He told Clara that kindness was worth more than money or beauty. His voice was calm, but firm. The crowd around them grew quiet. Clara forced a nervous smile and tried to change the subject, but the damage was done. Lila stood frozen, not knowing whether to thank him or leave. She had never been defended like that before. She wanted to disappear. Yet something about the way Ethan spoke gave her strength to stay. Ethan turned back to her. He asked her again about the pendant, this time with warmth in his tone. She hesitated, feeling shy as everyone's eyes watched. Quietly, she told him that it belonged to her mother. Ethan asked where her mother had gotten it, but Lila could only say that she had always had it as long as she remembered. Her mother used to say it was made by someone with good hands and a kind heart. Ethan looked down at the pendant for a long moment. The blue center caught the light and reflected it in tiny sparks. His memory went back many years. He remembered standing in his father's workshop as a boy, watching the piece being made. He remembered the pride in his father's eyes and the way he had spoken of giving it to someone special one day. That memory brought both warmth and sadness. The fire that took the workshop had taken that pendant too, or so he had thought. And now it hung around the neck of a girl who had been humiliated a few minutes earlier. Ethan straightened and glanced at the watching crowd before turning back to Lila. He asked if she would join him outside for a few minutes. Lila hesitated again, unsure, smiled gently, saying that fresh air might help her calm down after everything. She agreed quietly and followed him past the staring guests toward the doors that opened to the marble terrace. The night air was cool and soft on her skin. The noise from the hall faded behind them. They walked in silence for a few steps. Lila didn't know what to say. She was afraid that if she spoke too much, he might see how nervous she was. Ethan finally broke the silence. He said he was sorry for how the others had treated her, that no one deserved such cruelty. Lila shook her head and said she was used to it, though her voice trembled. She said that working in places like this meant pretending not to hear things. Ethan looked at her steadily. He said that she should never think less of herself because of other people's opinions. She looked up at him, and for a moment, she didn't see a billionaire. She saw someone human, someone carrying old grief behind calm eyes. Ethan asked again about her mother, and this time she told him a little more. Her mother had worked in a small jewelry shop long ago. She said her boss was a good man who treated her kindly and taught her how to recognize real craftsmanship. That was all she knew. Those words struck Ethan like a quiet storm. He realized that her mother must have worked for his father before the fire. It explained how she had come to own the lost pendant. That single piece of information connected everything in his mind. He didn't tell her right away. Instead, he stood still and said softly, "It is a very rare pendant, Lila. You should keep it safe." She nodded, not knowing why he spoke in such a serious tone. Her eyes met his again under the moonlight, and something silent passed between them. Lila felt warmth in her chest, not just gratitude, but something deeper, something that made her want to believe that maybe good things could happen even after nights like this. Behind them, the laughter inside the mansion began again, but Lila no longer cared. The world felt slightly different now. Ethan looked toward the sky, then back at her. And for the first time in a very long while, he felt a spark of something he had almost forgotten: hope. The next morning, Lila woke early in her small apartment above a grocery store. The night at the mansion still played in her head like a dream. She kept remembering the moment Ethan had spoken to her with kindness. She wondered if it had truly happened, or if she had imagined it. The pendant lay safely beside her on the table, its silver edges catching the morning light. She touched it gently, thinking of her mother as she always did. At the same time, far away in his tall glass office building, Ethan Monroe sat behind his desk, unable to focus. His assistant brought him stacks of papers to sign, but his mind stayed on the pendant he had seen. He could still see the blue spark of its stone, and the way it looked exactly like his father's lost work. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small box that he had kept for years. Inside was an old photograph of his father standing in front of his workshop, holding up that same pendant with pride. Ethan stared at it for a long time. The connection felt too strong to ignore. He decided he needed to know more about the girl named Lila Carter. Ethan called one of his private investigators, a man he trusted deeply, and asked him to look into Lila's background. He wanted answers about her mother and her past. The investigator promised to return with information as soon as possible. Across town, Lila went to work at the small cafe where she served coffee during the day. The place smelled like warm bread and roasted beans. It was small but friendly, unlike the cold halls of the mansion. Her friend Mia, who also worked there, noticed she looked lost in thought. Lila told her about meeting Ethan Monroe and how he had been kind to her. Mia almost dropped the coffee pot from surprise. She said anyone would be lucky for such attention, but Lila shook her head. She said she was sure a man like Ethan had already forgotten her. Yet deep down, something told her their story was not over. That evening, when the cafe closed, Lila sat by the window and watched the sunset. The pendant glowed faintly against her skin, as if it carried a light of its own. She whispered to it, thanking her mother for staying close to her in some way. The next day, Ethan received the report he had been waiting for. He opened it slowly and read carefully. The paper said that Lila's mother had once worked in his father's jewelry shop nearly 20 years ago. Her name was Margaret Carter. She had left the shop shortly before the fire that destroyed it. There was more. The pendant had indeed been one of the first pieces his father created, meant as a gift for someone who had helped him through hard times. When Ethan finished reading, he leaned back in his chair, deeply moved. He realized that Lila's mother had saved part of his father's legacy. Without her, the first piece of the Monroe collection would have been lost forever. He felt gratitude that words could not cover. The idea that this pendant had survived all these years and now rested on the neck of the daughter of the very woman his father respected made him feel as if fate had circled back to heal something broken. Ethan decided to meet Lila again. He asked his assistant to arrange for her to visit his office, saying it was about a charitable offer for the cafe she worked at. He wanted the meeting to seem natural, not intimidating. When Lila received the call, she almost refused out of fear, but Mia convinced her to go. The thought of seeing Ethan again made her both nervous and curious. The next morning, she arrived at the Monroe building wearing her best simple dress and holding her small purse tightly. The receptionist treated her warmly and guided her to the top floor. When she entered the bright office, Ethan stood near the window waiting for her. He smiled when he saw her, that same calm smile that made her heart feel safe. He asked her to sit and thanked her for coming. Ethan began to speak carefully, not wanting to overwhelm her. Told her that he had recognized her pendant, that it was something very important to him. Lila's eyes widened with surprise. He explained that his father had made it many years ago and that it was thought to be lost forever. Lila held the pendant protectively as she listened. She told him her mother had always said it was special, but never explained why. Ethan then told her about the fire that destroyed the workshop and how his father's life had changed after that day. His voice softened as he said that her mother must have been very special to his father. When he finished speaking, silence filled the room for a moment. Lila touched the pendant again. She said her mother had often spoken kindly of her old employer, a man who treated her with respect when no one else did. Tears filled her eyes as she realized how their families had crossed paths long ago. Ethan gently said that because of her mother, a piece of his father's dreams still lived. Lila smiled through her tears. The sadness in her heart felt lighter now. Ethan looked at her and said that some connections were written long before people understood them. Dawn. In that quiet moment, both of them felt that their meeting at the mansion had never been chance. It had been the start of something meant to happen. The night of the Whitmore charity ball had changed everything, but the true change showed in the weeks that followed. Life began to move differently for both Leela and Ethan. For Leela, the world seemed a little brighter, even though her daily routine stayed the same. She still worked at the cafe, still woke before dawn, and still carried her old handbag with careful pride. But now she had a reason to smile when she thought of that evening. She had met someone who looked at her as an equal for the first time in her life. For Ethan, the discovery of the pendant had opened an old door he had long kept shut. He spent many nights reading through his father's journals and letters, learning more about the shop, the workers, and the kindness that had built his family's early days. He began to remember the simple roots that once gave meaning to the Monroe name. Business had made him powerful, but it had also made him forget the heart behind the brand. Elias. Honesty and quiet dignity reminded him of what his father had always valued most. A few weeks later, Ethan planned another gala at the same mansion where Lila had once been laughed at. This time, the event was not only about charity, but about honoring the people who helped shape his father's success. He arranged for a small exhibition of his father's oldest jewelry pieces. At the center, under soft lights, he placed one special item on display, a recreated design of the pendant that Lila wore. Named the collection the Carter Legacy to honor Lila's mother. Lila did not know any of this yet. She received an elegant letter delivered to the cafe. It invited her to attend the upcoming event as a guest of honor. She was shocked and thought there must be a mistake. But the letter carried Ethan's name at the bottom, written in careful handwriting. Her hands shook as she read it again and again. Mia clapped her hands and told her she must go, that this was her moment to step into the light instead of serving from the shadows. On the night of the gala, Leela wore a simple white gown that Ethan's office had sent for her. It was soft and graceful, but not flashy, just like her. She looked at herself in the mirror before leaving and hardly recognized the reflection. The girl who once had been mocked and ignored now stood tall, her heart beating fast but strong. The pendant rested against her chest, shining softly as if it knew something special was about to happen. When she arrived at the mansion, the guests turned to watch her walk across the hall. The same chandeliers glowed, but the feeling in the room was different. The whispers this time were full of curiosity and admiration. Clara Bennett stood among the crowd, her face pale as she realized Lila was no longer a servant. Ethan walked toward Lila and greeted her with a kind smile, extended his hand, and she took it with quiet confidence. He led her to the center of the ballroom, where the new collection waited under bright lights. Ethan spoke to the audience with an honesty that touched every ear in the room. He told the story of his father's workshop, the fire, and the piece of jewelry that had survived through time. He explained that the pendant worn by Leela was not just a symbol of beauty, but of kindness, loyalty, and courage. He spoke the name Margaret Carter with respect, saying she had played an important role in the early days of his family's legacy. As Ethan spoke, Lila's eyes filled with tears. The same people who had once laughed at her now listened in silence. For the first time, she felt seen not for her poverty or her job, but for her truth. When Ethan ended his speech, the crowd began to applaud. Clara lowered her eyes and stepped back, embarrassed by her cruelty that night weeks ago. But Leela felt no anger toward her. Instead, she felt peace. The story had come full circle. Ethan turned to Lila and thanked her in front of everyone for bringing back a lost part of his father's dream. He said that some treasures come not from gold or fame, but from simple hearts that never give up. He placed a small velvet box in her hands. Inside was a new design pendant, shaped like her mother's, but this one carried both their initials. Lila could hardly speak. She managed to whisper thank you as her fingers closed around the box. After the applause ended, the music began. Ethan asked her if she would dance with him. Her heart raced, but she nodded. As they moved slowly across the ballroom floor, Lila no longer felt like the girl who was shamed or ignored. She felt like someone whose life had value, whose strength had finally been seen. The pendant against her heart glimmered with every turn, catching the golden light. When the evening ended, the mansion felt filled not just with wealth but with warmth. The story of the girl with the pendant spread quietly among the guests, not as gossip but as inspiration. Lila left the mansion that night with her head high and tears in her eyes, carrying a new hope inside her. Ethan watched her go, knowing that her grace had changed him forever. The mansion that once held shame now held memory, forgiveness, and the start of something new.